Welcome everybody to this latest edition of the Neighborhood Scope. Today we are going to be discussing Sri Lanka, and a lot of developments have taken place between India and Sri Lanka and in Sri Lanka over the last couple of years. Some tectonic changes have taken place in Sri Lanka, not just in the economic domain, but also in the political domain, and of course in the foreign policy domain. And we have a fabulous panel with us today. We have Mr. Ali Sabri, who's been a former member of parliament in Sri Lanka and a former finance minister, also a former minister of foreign affairs. We have Dr. Gulbeen Sultan from the IDSA. She's an associate research fellow specializing on South Asian security issues with a special focus on Sri Lanka and Maldives. We have Dr. Rehana Tawfiq, who's an economist and director of the Arutha, which is a Sri Lanka-based economic policy think tank. And last but not the least, we have the redoubtable Aditya Shivamurthy, who's an associate fellow at ORF and one of the few people again in the private think tank space focusing on Sri Lanka, Maldives, and other countries of South Asia. So without much ado, and while welcoming both our guests from Sri Lanka, I wish you could have been here, but I also wish I could have been there because Sri Lanka is a beautiful country, a country one always wants to visit. Unfortunately, the air tickets have become very expensive, even though hotels are not that expensive. So I think that kind of is becoming a dissuading factor. But very warm welcome to both of you for being part of this discussion today. Mr. Ali Sabri, if I could start with you.
Thank you.
We've recently had the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Sri Lanka. Earlier, we had the President of Sri Lanka visiting India. And going by the optics, the relations between both countries look to be very solid, on the upswing. But I think we need to be realistic enough to understand that Sri Lanka has, or at least in our perception, Sri Lanka does seem to have a kind of a balancing act to play between India, between China, and now increasingly the United States, which is demanding reciprocity even from countries where only penguins live. So it's becoming more and more difficult for countries to engage with the US on equal terms. So what are the kind of challenges that Sri Lanka faces in the foreign policy domain, especially given the fact that, it is a relatively small country, it has economic vulnerabilities, and how does it traverse this minefield, continues to remain engaged with the big partners and yet continues to maximize its own welfare and its own interest? Mr. Ali Sabri, please.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the ORA Foundation and for Mr. Sarin for converging this meeting and also for inviting me. I think a very good question. Basically, we have been grappling with this challenge ever since independence. I think it's nothing new, but it has been increased over a period of time with geopolitical battles all over the world. And Sri Lanka, like most of the countries in the region and world, is slowly I think migrating towards from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. So we need to come to terms with that reality. Sri Lanka, being traditionally, had taken a lot of pride in our independence and non-aligned foreign policy. Non-aligned doesn't mean that in the 21st century, not about sitting on the fence. It's about choosing principles over pressure and partnership over patronage. So I think we have very clearly articulated over a period of time across the government. Sometimes some governments have taken a little bit of a tilt towards a particular country or two. But every time we have done that, we have learned a lesson. So therefore, the best time-tested strategy for Sri Lanka is to continue to maintain its strategic autonomy and also work with everyone. That's the most important part in our in a thick of things to come. Particularly, being a small country, Sri Lanka, for example, we heavily rely on our export to Western countries. It is where our export goes to US, and it's a lot of ripples going through in Sri Lanka. Our stock market has seen massive drop just because 23% of our account, our export goes to US, and then so though still in pause, so that problem is there. So therefore, we have to have good relationship with the West. But in the meantime, India had been our traditional friend, and particularly in the recent past, it had come to help us. And I was the finance minister when I first discussed the discussion in Washington. I remember Mrs. Sitaraman, the role she played, a massive role in supporting to break the initial IMF deal, or at least concurrence from the IMF. I remember in the morning I went to the IMF, and the picture was very negative, along with the governor and the secretary. But in the evening, I met the managing directors. And by that time, the whole mood had changed and very welcoming. But in between, only one thing happened. That is, Mrs. Sitaraman met IMF managing director and the team. And she told me 70% of the time was consumed not to talk about Indian economy, but about the Sri Lankan economy. So we are very, very grateful. India played that role during a very, very crucial period of time. And then, of course, China, if you look at with all the ups and downs, if you carefully look at it, Sri Lankan economy from 2005 to 2015 grew the fastest, from about 25 billion to about 85 billion. Most of those was possible because a lot of investment came from China on infrastructure, in roads and all those things. So there is a debate whether that would have been put into better use. Yes, it could have been. Yeah, everybody's learning from it. So, and therefore, all these three partners are key for us. And if you look at Middle East, it's very, very important for us because the remittance comes from there. So therefore, Sri Lanka had no choice rather than continuing in that path, while in an open, transparent manner. I think everyone else is also doing the same thing. If you look at India, you work with China in BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation, while you work with the US and others on Quads. So therefore, that's the level we have come into. It's a multi-pronged partnership today. It's not about choosing partners, it's about choosing interest which is mutually beneficial. So that is why I feel in the near future, Sri Lanka cannot and should not take any sides, but work very closely with it. But in the meantime, it is also important that we cannot be prisoners of the past. I have been telling this in Parliament and outside and inside all the time. Sometimes what happens is Sri Lankans or in our region, we have been tied by our past experiences. So sometimes negative ones plays a massive role. We cannot do that. I think things have changed, a new dynamic, new power in the region. Everyone understands that. India is the fastest growing large economy. And it is, I have told in the parliament also, every time it is a region which are developed, whether the mainland China or North America, though it's America, United States of America, 50 states. It is the European Union, then the Southeast Asian countries of the ASEAN, then the Gulf countries. So this is the South Asia's turn. And that is being led by India. So we need to understand, pragmatic enough to understand that a huge opportunity for all the countries, including Sri Lanka, to benefit out of it. Therefore, we need to work as sovereign equals with mutual respect, look at issues, and also you can discount the public opinion in both countries when doing so. So therefore, policymakers need to take very special care as to how to calibrate this and to present to the public so the public get the exact picture and not allowing politicians to distort it. So that's what my take, sorry.
Very interesting points, Mr. Sabri, but allow me to just ask you a question, a follow-up. I understand the principle that Sri Lanka, and like many other countries, including India, as you very correctly point out, no country really wants to take sides. But don't you think, in fact, you have a much greater experience, both as somebody who's handled external affairs as well as the finance ministry. the way the world is now structured, countries are being asked to pick sides, uh, and that kind of complicates matters. So what you are saying in principle is absolutely a no-brainer. But how do you put that in practice, given the kind of pulls and pressures which are bound to come? The gloves are off, if I
Yeah, I
might
know.
say so.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think many times Sri Lankan we have been criticized for not to having written foreign policy. But in my term, it was deliberate. We did not have it because it's impossible to do one. It's all you. The moment you put that in writing, then you are fixed there. So therefore, the flexibility is most important thing. From outside, you can talk so many things, but once you are in running the operation, the multiple pressure comes from different areas. You need to carefully calibrate it and see that how do we navigate it. So unfortunately, an increasingly nationalistic governments coming all over the world, they are not looking at the world's economy, but they are looking at, as you correctly pointed out, the current tariffs from US. It's becoming increasingly difficult for people to stay on course. But on the other hand, small countries like Sri Lanka have no choice. If you take sides, I wouldn't. I mean, I won't mince my words. And in the history, I think a couple of times Sri Lankans have picked sides, and we have all ended up in disaster. For example, 77 onwards, President Jayawardena was ahead of his time. He opened the economy first in the South Asia. He was good. He understood it. But unfortunately, his foreign relationship and the manner in which he probably handled the Sri Lankan ethnic affairs was not great. One area was he antagonized India, trying to be too close to Western countries. And ultimately, I think we paid a price. So similarly, in 2010 to 14, Rajapaksa's got a little more close to China than more than what it was required. And ultimately, that also came to a grinding halt. So therefore, I think whole experience during the last 76 years or so, the time we have gone beyond our boundaries and being close to a particular country or a particular power, it has always come to haunt us. So therefore, it's important that we learn with that and also calibrate it properly. If you ask me what is the most important relationship for Sri Lanka, I will say without hesitation, I have said it in open and also in UN, it is the Indian relationship. Why that? India is our neighbor. India, in good times and bad times, India had stood with us. And India has a civilizational contact with Sri Lanka. It's religious, it's cultural, it's people to people. Yes, so it's important that people understand and keep that there. But that doesn't mean that that's the only relationship. So it's important that India need also to understand that Sri Lanka need to have that time and space to manage its affairs as an independent, sovereign state while not compromising India's legitimate security concerns. Very, very important, because we need to have a stable, strong neighbors, good for all. I think Indian stability, Indian security, Indian peace, and Indian economic growth is very, very important for Sri Lanka's own destiny and also for fortunes.
Mr. Sabri, I think you make some fabulous points, but everything you've said towards the end is a good segue to go to Aditya. I was planning to go to Rehana earlier, but let me go to Aditya. And let me just try and tickle you a bit on this taking sides business. Recently, after Prime Minister Modi's visit, we saw a security agreement with Sri Lanka. We call it a defense cooperation agreement. We don't know much of the details. We don't have the details of what exactly is entailed in it. But what is the significance of this agreement? What do you think it involves? Uh, do you think this is some kind of a balancing act on the part of Sri Lanka between India and China? Because we've also heard that Sri Lanka has assured India that Sri Lankan soil would not be used against India, uh, and I think that has its own messaging. How are you looking at this whole defense and security cooperation aspect of the India-Sri Lanka relationship? Aditya.
Right. So I would rather start with saying the defense cooperation MOU that was signed between India and Sri Lanka is the first such MOU between both the countries. And considering that the bilateral relations have seen a lot of back and forth in the last 7 to 8 decades, it's rather interesting to see the timing and the development of the defense cooperation between both the countries. In fact, I think that shows a point where what Minister Sabri was saying earlier is the fact that Sri Lanka is increasingly understanding the sensitivities and the red lines that India consistently asks its neighbors to respect. Um, Now, upon that, I think the hints were already dropped back in December 2024 when Anurag Dissanayake was in India. There was a joint statement that spoke about certain kind of defense cooperation, but I think it even goes beyond that. In fact, the 1 year ban on the Chinese spy vessels coming to Sri Lanka was in itself a big case to show how Sri Lanka is increasingly growing sensitive towards Indian concerns. That said, there is a lot of balancing to do, and from what we read was also that Sri Lanka had to take a lot of a lot of backfiring from China because of imposing this ban for 1 year. But at the end of the day, it also shows that there is an increasing understanding, especially because of the Indian assistance that has come in post economic during the economic crisis, and I think that kind of an equation still continues to exist. And it would be an interesting observation that even after the 1 year ban has expired, that no Chinese ship has been yet has visited Sri Lanka or are scheduled to visit Sri Lanka anytime soon. So that is an interesting thing to observe. What the defense agreement or the defense cooperation MOU entails is itself, it's not very much public. But what we know is this is a kind of an umbrella framework agreement that tries to increase and bring together all the defense cooperation, variety of defense cooperation that existed between India and Sri Lanka. Now, this includes military exercises, capacity building programs, trainings, the port calls, and all of these kind of cooperation that used to happen individually. I think that is something that is being mainstream now, and that is something that is being done uniformly. But there was also an indication that that if whatever happens in the Indian Ocean region will have a spillover implication, be it in India or be it in Sri Lanka. So there is increasing coordination and cooperation on non-traditional security as well. They are realizing that trafficking, terrorism, or even humanitarian assistance, disaster response needs to be streamlined. So I think this defense cooperation MOU is intended to push upon that defense cooperation, and is intended to bring India and Sri Lanka together in an area of cooperation which is most important at this point in time. And this comes at a time where India is looking for expanding its defense cooperation in the Mahasagar region, going beyond the Indian Ocean region, and now trying to develop beyond global south. So I think that is something that has just come up, and it also shows in a way that India and Sri Lanka are now also willing to collaborate on oceanography and hydrography and maritime domain awareness, which has been a primary concern for India, because India has consistently kept on telling Sri Lanka that the Chinese spy ships that come in, they will continue to militarize the Indian Ocean region. They'll continue to weaponize the Indian Ocean region. So I think by building Sri Lanka's capacity, especially in the hydrography sector, it's also one way that India can push back increasing Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region. And I think that kind of mutual understanding exists between both the countries now, and especially on the Sri Lankan um, side, that shows that there is increasing sensitivity, there is increasing understanding that these are the red lines that we don't have to cross. And in fact, the balancing game will go on, but core security concerns and core security interests are something that have to be preserved and that has to be maintained for a longer run.
Thanks, Aditya. Rehana Tawfiq, if I could just turn to you now. Sri Lanka has been through a pretty torrid time a couple of years back in the economic domain. after the default happened. But I think increasingly it seems like the economy has stabilized, and things are getting back on the rail. It remains precarious from what we can make out, but that stabilization has come about. What we don't, however, see is the kind of structural reforms which are probably required in the economy to put it back on a much firmer footing. Would you agree with that assessment that the structural reforms have been patchy at best? So some subsidies have been withdrawn, but some of the behemoths, the public sector units, continue to stay under state control. Their efficiency will, of course, remain impaired as long as they are in state control, under state control. So how is the structural aspect of economic reforms playing out in Sri Lanka, and what are the political economic consequences or implications of bringing about those structural reforms? Rihanna.
Thank you, Sushant, and thank you, Arif, for having me. Very good question. So yes, Sri Lanka has stabilized to a great extent. Macroeconomically speaking, inflation is down to something like single-digit levels. We actually even had a period of deflation very recently. GDP is expected to be something like 3 to 4%. We've completed debt restructuring and even actually got credit rating upgrades. And now we sort of have a clearer picture of what the debt situation is going to look like. On the reforms, which sort of were the big the big things that had to be done during the crisis. The debt restructuring was, of course, one of the structural reforms that had to happen. And that has gone relatively well. There are some reforms, like if you take fiscal consolidation. So the IMF program was largely focused on the revenue mobilization, and that has happened to a great extent. We have seen a growth in tax revenues collected. You're seeing sort of more and more people registering to pay tax, for instance, but there's also a lot of issues within this whole tax administration side of things, which is that whether the existing tax authorities have the capacity to really transform Sri Lanka from a situation where we had something like 8% tax to GDP ratio to something like 13-14%, and I think even the government is looking at even making it 20%. So really, it's a big, there are capacity issues, there are administration issues that have to be solved. The previous government, which was in power for, I think, something like 2.5 years, did institute or did get the ball rolling on a lot of the structural reforms, like, for instance, on reforming the state-owned enterprises, but that has completely now come to a standstill. Sri Lankan Airlines, for instance, which was sort of on the table for divestiture, has now the government. I think the most recent news was that the government is going to stop that particular plan, but we don't really know what they're going to do with it. And of course, there is a lot of, as you said, the political economy side of things. If you take SOE reforms, there's a lot of pushback from unions. There are a lot of vested interest groups within this whole structure who don't want that kind of structural reform to go through, whether it's in electricity. Actually, we are seeing some of the electricity reforms also trying, there's an attempt to sort of scale it back. So there are lots of vested interests in these. And even if you take trade, for instance, trade reforms, I think until this whole US, Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, trade was sort of on the back burner. And now it has come to the forefront again about what are we going to do with the trade reform, because that, again, was one of the big structural reforms that had to take place. So again, within this whole trade, space, there are vested interest groups that push particular sort of their own interests. So whether, it's yet to be seen what can happen overarchingly. But now that we've managed to sort of restructure our debt and the IMF program is going smoothly, things are sort of, the kind of pressure that was there for structural reforms maybe 1-2 years ago is starting to wane. So whether we can ensure that this momentum continues, the momentum for structural reforms actually is carried forward, is a question.
Ask you a follow-up. How much does the political ideology of the ruling party have to do with the problems of pushing ahead with privatization? Because it's supposed to be a socialist Marxist ideology, which at one level they represent. Is that a stumbling block in the path of going in for privatization of the big corporation, state-owned enterprises? That is one, and the second one is linked to what you just said about the. It seems like the structural reforms are stalling. And we've seen this happen in many countries which have gone in for IMF programs after default. That the moment the situation starts stabilizing a little bit, that reform impulse simply goes out of the window until the next crisis then hits, which is even worse than the previous one. I hope the policymakers in Sri Lanka are cognizant about the trajectory of events if they don't follow through with the reforms. What would you say?
So I'll address your first question, which was on the ideology of the ruling party and its relationship to privatization. I think we can take sort of if you look at it overall, I think a lot of things were said, for example, on the campaign trail during the presidential elections, like, we're going to relook at IMF, we are going to relook at debt restructuring. But once they came into power, you did see a lot more pragmatic and practical approach to the IMF program and even the debt restructuring. So I will say that they have been very pragmatic in their approach. And in fact, their pragmatism has won over their ideology, all the things that they said on the campaign trail to a great extent. They are, particularly with privatization, yes, I think to a large extent it is their ideology that privatization is not the solution and that the state can infuse efficiency and governance into these SOEs, which is seen as the root cause of sort of the issues with respect to the loss-making entities. But again, it's not like Sri Lanka has not done this before. We have tried various kinds of reforms which don't include privatization. But I will say, although they seem to be opposed to outright privatization, but not so much to, say, partial privatization, because they've even floated the idea of putting some of the SOEs on the stock exchange. So they are open to a certain degree of privatization, not completely closed off. But I think outright privatization probably is, not really on the table considering their ideology.
Thank you very much for your patience. But I had to set the stage for you. Now, what in your assessment is the state of the political relationship between India and Sri Lanka? We've had ups and downs in this bilateral relationship. There were some fears being expressed at one point of time when Mr. Dissanayake won the election in a landslide, that there are chances that India's relationship with Sri Lanka could go south very, very fast. I think it is the pragmatism of the Sri Lankan government, which was elected by a huge mandate, that in fact things have improved as we've gone forward. But how are you looking at this relationship, one? And do you think that there is a kind of a political consensus now in Sri Lanka on the kind of relationship they need to have with India? Because we've often seen that in the past that political consensus has not been there. There have been parties that have used the India bogey to gather support. Do you think that's a thing of the past now, or do you think there is still a danger that this India bogey can once again come into play and foul up the relationship between India and Sri Lanka? Please.
First of all, thank you, Warif and both of you, for inviting me. And it's an interesting question. And I think I would like to answer these questions in various sections. First of all, I think if you ask me how is the political relationship, it's I think significantly improved, and I agree totally with Mr. Hana and also with you that the ruling party is following a pragmatic approach. And given Sri Lanka's economic situation, not only because of economic crisis and after US tariff policy, there is also economic vulnerability because of uncertainty about EU GSP scheme. So there are lots of vulnerabilities. Though Sri Lanka is in the path of economic recovery, but whether it will sustain, that's a concern because of all these external shocks. So given this vulnerability, I think the ruling party is taking a pragmatic approach, and they are trying to reaching out to India and trying to have a good political relations. And in the past, if we see, yes, there are, if we talk about JVP, we have seen the JVP, opposing many of the projects in the past, India-funded projects and all. So since now JVP has changed its approach, so we can say that broadly there is a political consensus. Having said that, I would like to also mention that anti-India feeling that is deep-rooted in Sri Lanka. It may be latent, and it's not like it just started in 1980s because of India's role in the ethnic conflict or IPKF. It has been there, I think, even before independence, it was there. Even in 1950s, 60s, if we see the parliamentary debate in Sri Lanka, there were that kind of feeling. Various writings, like writings of Panikkar and all, they also impacted. So there was a feeling that India might have some kind of imperialistic design, and then it might intervene in Sri Lanka. Those kind of fears were there. Now, sometimes these fears were based on, misperceived notions, and sometimes because of some of the incidents happened over the periods. So that kind of feeling is very much there. But I think the post-economic crisis, that doesn't mean that, we did not have good relations and friend relations. Even post-economic crisis, if I see, not only in the political class, they are like talking about having good relations with India. Even in the Sri Lankan media, if you see, even the economist experts, many of them are talking about that it's important for Sri Lanka to work with India. Of course, there are issues, and those issues can be, Sri Lanka should engage with India and try to see how they can resolve it through diplomatic channels. So those things are like improving. But now in the past, if we see, like there are some, kind of section, or, because of their vested interest, be it political or economic, from time to time they have objected on various India-funded projects. So if I talk about issues in India-Sri Lanka relations, now government to government level, I think there is an understanding whenever there are issues. Even in the past, we have seen that both sides try to discuss diplomatically, try to resolve it. So at this point of time, I think that's happening. It doesn't mean, though JVP is taking a pragmatic approach, still there are issues. I can see there are some differences. I won't say they are like a major issue between India and Sri Lanka, but there are differences. For example, on the issue of India and Sri Lanka's claim on continental shelf. In the coming days, it may become an issue. As of now, it's not that issue. And I think Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry issued a statement that they would like to diplomatically resolve this issue with India. Then another issue, if I can say, is about the BRICS. Sri Lanka has requested India's support on the issue of BRICS. I think India has not officially responded yet. So I'm not saying these are issues, but there are differences. Again, when President Anurag Kumar Dissanayake visited China, that time we saw like slight changes on the issue of Tibet. Like Sri Lanka has always followed a one China policy, I mean, supported. But this time, I think they talked about Tibet issue also. So there may be so these kind of differences are there at government level. But there are other policies and projects where there are understandings between the two governments, but there are dissatisfaction at the popular level or maybe oppositions. If the current the last prime minister's visit, if we see defense security cooperation agreement, there are like nobody is opposing it, but there are concerns like what is it about. There are people are writing. Then there are also digital identification project which is being assisted by India. Again, people have some kind of suspicions and doubts. And I think this kind of doubts and suspicions about India assisted or India funded projects is not just because people are anti India or they don't like India. It's because they are not aware of what kind of agreements are being signed between the two governments. So basically, when they are asking questions, they are asking actually the government why they are not being disclosed. Even some of the agreements, probably they are not being discussed in the parliament also. So there are lots of lack of informations are there, and at this point of time, it's not happening. But in the past, what we have seen that because of this lack of information, various people with vested interest, they try to exploit that latent anti-India feeling, and that is why probably we see sometimes this kind of objections come, like whenever the two sides sign agreement, sometimes they have to be cancelled, sometimes they are delayed. So these problems are there. Having said that, I would also like to mention that once, as Minister Sabri has mentioned, that sometimes probably to discount the political popular feelings or sentiments. So if governments are determined and they implement some of the projects, and if they are actually benefiting the people, then people forget it. One example, I think I have talked about this project before also, like the ambulance service, which India funded in Sri Lanka. When it was announced, there were lots of criticism. People thought that India would get their people, Indians, to maintain and run that thing. But when it was implemented and it's running well, I mean, everybody is happy, nobody is objecting. But then there are certain projects, maybe there are genuine real concerns. Maybe the concerns can be environmental concern or the governance issues, like maybe some contracts are offered without following due process. So when there are genuine concerns, then people object, and I think then that become an issue. If we see, like, of course, some of the projects got cancelled or people are talking about it's there, but at the same time there are so many projects happening, so many investors are investing, private companies are there, and nobody is saying, like Tata, Mahindras, they are very much there, nobody is criticizing. So when we talk about this relationship and anti-India sentiment or this kind of thing, I think we need to take it a nuanced approach instead of you just generally saying that there is an anti-India feeling. Thank you.
So I think that's a very valid point you make. In fact, my own experience of traveling in Sri Lanka, even during times when the political relationship was not good, was that it was probably one of the most hospitable countries, and probably the only country in this region where actually, as an Indian, one felt welcomed. I can't say that of any other country, and I've traveled to all of them. But Sri Lanka was one place where I've always loved to go, simply because you feel so welcomed out there. And political differences, I suppose, is it's normal between countries to have differences on projects and other things. In fact, on the digital ID project, I think the amount of opposition we face inside India has no parallel, anyways. So I think that's a point which is well taken. But I just need a very quick follow up from you. And this is something which is not limited only to Sri Lanka. We've seen it in some of the other countries as well. Many of the objections which are often raised about India are just not raised when it comes to China. Is this because they have a sense of entitlement on India? Or what is it? I've not been able to put my finger on it. Maybe you would want to attempt on what is the reason why you look at India differently and you look at China differently, even though we haven't done debt trap diplomacy, we haven't done many of the other things that the Chinese have done. and yet, we have always seen as this big bad wolf waiting in the wings to eat somebody up, which I don't think anybody in India is interested in doing. But what's your take on it?
So yeah, I think I would like to hear this answer this. I mean, hear the response of Sri Lanka.
Maybe I'll take it
Yeah,
from.
yeah.
I will take
Then
it
I
from them,
will.
but I want your answer
Yeah, yeah.
also.
So I actually asked some Sri Lankans this question myself, and then the answer I found is actually, if you see India China, the Chinese funded project and India funded project. Now often we get to hear about this delivery deficiency or efficiency and all those things. Now the I think major problem I was told is that when China does any kind of project, mostly they get their people, but in India, when Indian project, there is a kind of SOPs. I mean, they have to take local people and also there. So the I mean, they could finish. I mean, the totally, it's totally different the way Chinese people are working, and I mean, they have a particular deadline and they have to finish and they have to go back. So those kind of strict kind of policies they follow. So there, I think one. So when they criticize some of the issues, maybe they are genuine. Probably there are, like, delays in Indian funded projects, but when they compare, they see, like, there are delays. And so the system, how China functions and how India functions, I think there is one region. So there, maybe you can see the outcome when you see there are differences. Then secondly, also, I think when, like, Chinese projects, we have seen that some of the uh, projects, when the Chinese come, they do. And why Chinese are coming, then doing strategic projects. People are not opposing in Sri Lanka, but when Indians are involved in some strategic projects, like, there are so much questions of sovereignty and all those issues come. I think when China does, it's the question of due process or governance issues. I think what I was told is, when Chinese and Sri Lankan government, they do, it's always government to government kind of understanding. So but I think in India, they are following this private public partnership kind of model. So when you need to follow the tendering process and all, the due process was followed. So Chinese, when it's a government to government, the government can bring any company, and it's there is no question, they are not breaking laws or something. But when it comes to, if it is like private investment on public, it cannot be. That is why we saw that one of the Indian projects, which was earlier, it was a like private investment, but later, because of the criticism, it was converted into government to government project. I'm talking about some Adani project and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
in the past. So this kind of, I think, technical issues are there. And of course, as I mentioned, that because there are so much lack of information on the various agreements signed, and as I mentioned, the vested interest, so they exploit the opportunities. I mean, because of their own interest, probably it is very, and because it is very easy to manipulate that latent anti-India feelings, when the informations are not there. So they do it. Even in the past, also signing that comprehensive economic partnership agreement in 2012-13. It was basically because of some of the businessmen in Sri Lanka, probably it was not signed. They had their own vested interest. Of course, there are some genuine concerns, but then people
Yeah,
were
but
so.
again, I think that is businessmen everywhere. If they
Yeah,
see competition coming
there.
in, they have their problems.
Yeah.
But which, Rehana, if I can just turn to you before I go to Mr. Sabri, uh, what is the situation with the external debt restructuring, especially the Chinese debt? Uh, how has that been managed? How is that structured? Uh, how much of strain is it putting on Sri Lanka's external balances? Can you give us some idea on how Sri Lanka is planning to manage this entire debt mountain which exists, and the growth imperative, because growth seems to have suddenly stalled again. How do you maintain a balance between the two? And while you're answering this, if you can tell us about this whole debt trap diplomacy thing. Yeah, the Chinese have built some really nice fancy projects, but they don't seem to be paying for themselves. They seem to be like white elephants. So how is Sri Lanka managing or hoping to get around that issue?
Thanks, Sushant. So on the debt restructuring, external debt restructuring, Sri Lanka has actually successfully completed our external debt restructuring as well as its domestic debt restructuring. And of course, India played a big role in the run up to the default as well as during the debt restructuring to support Sri Lanka to, be able to quickly finish this whole restructuring process, but there were delays in getting financing assurances from China, for instance. But 2.5 years later, we have successfully managed to complete it. Our credit ratings have been upgraded, but I don't think we'll be able to access the international financial markets as of yet. And we owe something like 4% of our external debt to India. We will begin paying our ISBs this year itself. It'll be about USD 750 million per year until about 2035, and then about 1 billion plus till 2038. So it is not as big a burden as it was prior to the restructuring, but it is still a significant outflow for the foreseeable future. So if we go back to the causes of the crisis, which was this budget deficit, which was the twin deficit problem, this fiscal deficit problem, and this, external balances. So the government is doing a lot in terms of trying to fix this budget deficit problem, but how much are we doing to fix this, our current account problem? Of course, now with the whole global situation, this has come again back to the fore. So we are positive that we are hopeful that things will move positively. And now also we see, like for instance, with even China. And with most bilateral, most countries that we have bilateral partnerships with, taking more of an investment-oriented approach to partnership with Sri Lanka rather than a debt-oriented approach. And I think this will be beneficial for Sri Lanka economically in terms of knowledge transfer, technological transfer. So the debt burden is a lot more sustainable, but of course Sri Lanka needs to focus on growing its export earnings and growing its economy. On the economic growth problem, and now even though you were talking about this debt trap diplomacy, I must challenge you on that and say that we don't. Of course, there is, multiple schools of thought in Sri Lanka also, but at our institution, and in fact, one of my fellow directors has also challenged this myth of debt trap diplomacy. So China owes, China owns about 13% of our external debt, but the larger problem really, something like about 29%. So a large chunk of our external debt is owned by is in ISBs, and this can be owned by anybody, right? So it's not and if you take Chinese projects, yes, there have been issues with respect to transparency, governance, corruption. These have been issues, and it's not to deny that has existed. But I think just going back to your earlier question that you put to Dr. Gulbin, I think sort of India probably gets more scrutiny and criticism than China, because India has had a much longer relationship with India, and this has gone beyond just debt or just investment. It has been, India has been involved in Sri Lanka's ethnic issue. There have been involvement in trying to this 13th Amendment or Indo-Lanka. We have had free trade agreements with India. We are in several regional agreements with India. So I think the scrutiny probably comes from, this greater involvement in Sri Lanka's domestic affairs than China, which we have had sort of a more, one-dimensional, relationship with. But again, India, China, and US, all very important economic partners for Sri Lanka. Balancing it is going to be critical, and I think Sri Lanka has several strategic advantages. Its location, whether it's a skilled workforce. So how do we leverage these partnerships and these relationships? Of course, Sri Lanka has not been very good at regionalism. We tend to look at even countries like India rather as competitors rather than as partners. So hopefully this dynamic changes and we do start to look at each other more as partners and sort of leveraging that partnership for growth.
But I think another asset which Sri Lanka has is Sri Lankan diplomats are very sophisticated and pretty good. We've seen that not just at the professional level, but even at the political level. And of course, we have Mr. Sabri with us, who in the first round of questioning answered these questions fabulously well. But Mr. Sabri, since you are not in government these days, maybe you are a lot more freer to talk freely. And if you can tell us what, in your view, are the big irritants between India and Sri Lanka, and what are the kind of things that both sides need to do to put these irritants behind us and move forward in the relationship, take it to the next level? I don't know where the next level really ends, but a much higher plane than where we are currently. What, in your view, are those things which you would look at?
Basically, few things to iron out. I thought we must understand one thing. Sri Lanka had been a democracy for a long period of time, along with India, right? So in Sri Lanka, one man, however powerful they are, cannot get his way for a long period of time. The civil society, the judiciary, the public, and the opposition will continue to question you. So the best way to get over that is to be as transparent as possible. And for example, I can't, I mean, when we were negotiating in 2023, even the IMF, we departed from the past and produced all those things to the debt restructuring agreement, IMF agreement, everything was presented to the parliament. So I thought even the defense agreement that we are talking about should have been put before. Then we can iron out and finish it off. As the Gulbin very correctly pointed out, it's important. Some of those things only want an icebreaker, so people, as long as that's been put forward and they are in the public domain, the conspiracy theories comes to an end. Otherwise, there are never-ending conspiracy theories. So therefore, it's important a transparency and a joint effort and a PR relationship. I've been telling you, High Commissioner, right, current High Commissioner and the previous one also, a PR from the Indian government and from our side also is important, because most of these projects are actually for the benefit of the people. No, almost all the projects are. It's going to benefit. There is so we can't be prisoners of the past. I've always been saying, just like before the First and the Second World War, it is the European countries, Western European countries fought each other, but post-Second World War, they realized that they come together, So therefore, if you look at our relationship, we have had a great relationship. Of course, there are ups and downs in any relationship, but there are so many things in common. So therefore, first thing, I think we need to be transparent. We need to put before the public, and we need to confront even conspiracy theories or whatever it is, so that people will come to terms with it. The other important thing is our press is also very intrusive, both in Sri Lanka and in India. No slightest thing, they can probably, I remember last time, during the last election, this Kachativa agreements were coming in. So your press would probe me and come and ask me questions at the Foreign Affairs Minister. What do you have to say about those things? So I didn't know what to say, what not to say. So therefore, we need to come to terms with it, understand this reality in a democracy. So if you ask that, but why you feel that the Indian things are more scrutinized? I do agree with Rehana when she said that in the longer period of time. On top of that, the only thing is because in India, you only get to know the Indian relationship. Being a foreign minister, when I discuss with India, Indians will come with it. For example, if I talk to the Chinese, they will say that the only project in the whole region where President Xi Jinping himself came and opened was our port city. The investment is about 15 billion, not a rupee from the Sri Lanka, entire thing from US. And it was stopped without reason in 2014. And I thought that was that was one of the biggest mistake what we did, as a result of which our economy, which grew almost about 6%, sometimes 7.3% from 2005 to 2014. By the end of that government in 2018, 2019, came down to 2.1%, just above Afghanistan. So that sent shock waves. Now, recently, when I went to Middle East about 2 years ago to canvass for it, they asked us, what is the guarantee you can give across the government, whatever the project you are canvassing could hold water. No, this has sent shock waves on that. And Chinese stopped investment since then. So Chinese have a huge grievance on that. And then that stopped for about 18 months. You look at the investment out of 15 billion worth of investment. And then we call for tenders for 3 island project for solar power, and Chinese companies won. And then, of course, legitimately, India had a concern, which is very close to the southern India. When we had to close that and cancel the tender and give it to an Indian operation. So Chinese have a concern. So any relationship will have that kind of a issue. So therefore, Indians and Indian journalists and Indian media, rightly so, are only kind of taking up the issues which directly affect China. And Chinese are saying, you call it as, I know Mr. Aditya called the Chinese spaceship. They are saying, no, these are research vessels. We can do it outside the Sri Lankan waters also, whatever if you want to do. So therefore, nothing wrong in this. So difficult for us to grapple with it. So therefore, that is where the diplomacy is important. I think somewhere down the line, I think both parties have to sit, be open, transparent, say these are the limits, these are off limits. This could be done, this cannot be done. It is in that sense, I thought we should proceed with it. So, and then the geopolitics, public perception, internal politics, democracy itself, where opposition will always find some reason to criticize the project. For example, the current president, I do agree, the current government had economic front had not done anything but they promised during the campaign. I'm glad that they did it, because we did so much of hard work to get the economy back on track. They are continuing that. I'm glad for that. But having said so, during the campaign, they said everything against that. If you look at the current president told that why are we building the port city in Sri Lanka, and we will never be able to build the port city, even if you break the Sigiriya, the mountain, the rock. So that's the way the economy, the democracies function here. But once they come to power, they understand that everything what we said on an election platform cannot be going through. So therefore, what I suggest that in a nutshell, how to overcome this: be more transparent, be more open, mutually respectful, understand that a country like Sri Lanka need to work with everybody, all the countries, but Sri Lanka need to understand the real sensitivities of the Indian security concerns. So I think if we can understand and thrash this out, of course, the fisheries is an issue. That's a long-standing issue. We need to find a way to settle that also. We need to look at that on an environmental and also mutually beneficial and a humane approach rather than a bilateral issue. I think we need to sit and talk on that. We haven't spoken to each other on that at high level, other than passing remarks during bilateral discussions. We never had sat and discussed this in detail to find solution for the last probably 15 years or so. So it's time that we one by one resolve this. And one important thing Gulbin brought up is that the continental shelf, which could be also an issue which will have a difference over a period of time, because Sri Lanka have claimed for an extended continental shelf. India have originally agreed for that and no objection in 2009. Since of late, I think there are a little bit of cobalt deposit which has been found within this period area. So India had objected to that, and Sri Lanka had made an application for that. So there are issues like that. I think that's not unusual for neighbor, and even in a family you will issue. So if you feel and expect in a bilateral relationship without issues, I think we are naive. We will have issues, but what we need is to sit in a mechanism to resolve this and move forward in a very transparent manner and place before the parliament and thrash it out once and for all. Then most of the conspiracy theories will die a natural death.
Excellent point, sir. And in fact, if I could just add one point, is that perhaps the media also on both sides needs to have a lot more nuance than what they have, especially on this Kachai Tibu issue. Uh, that was a domestic political football which was being played in India. It had nothing to do with Sri Lanka. Nobody bothered about what Sri Lanka's position is going to be, but nevertheless, and as soon as the election was over, nobody is even talking about it anymore. So yeah, it was a stick to beat up the opposition with, but which is part and parcel of politics. And you being a politician and a consummate one at that, surely understand it. The media obviously doesn't. But Aditya, if I can just turn to you and on this whole India-Sri Lanka, during the latest visit, we saw something which normally we don't see during Indian prime ministerial visits, which was a trilateral agreement on the development in Trincomalee. And we have the UAE as a partner. Now, what exactly is involved in this? Is this the old oil farms being expanded and then being expanded to what? One, and second, are there any other such cooperative models with other players that can be explored between India, Sri Lanka, and whichever other player can be brought in? I think with the Japanese, we've done something, but I don't remember if we've done this kind of a trilateral model. If you could just shed some light on that.
Okay, let me give you a cliche statement. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. I think Sri Lanka should be known as a graveyard for trilateral collaborations when India brings in. It's a good question asking. Let me just start with the cooperative models that India has tried to bring into Sri Lanka over the last 6-7 years, right? The first one, which you briefly brought out, was the collaboration in the Colombo port, in the East Container Terminal between Japan, India, and Sri Lanka, right? The government was fine with it. Then things started picking up a bit of pace, and this was a tripartite agreement. And then the new government comes in, and then there's a lot of protests against these projects, and unilaterally it decides to cancel this project, right? What India and Japan called as Asia-Africa Growth Corridor tried to counter Belt Road Initiative in the earlier days. The project was nowhere to be seen, right? It was soon dismantled, and it was an unilateral move, and India and Japan had expressed their concerns, and it did have an impact on bilateral relations. Nonetheless, it showed one thing, right? That politics makes certain things vulnerable in Sri Lanka, especially when it's projects. Then the second kind of a project that came in recently was, again, the West Container Terminal, where the Adani moved in, and the US decided to invest around $500 million. Again, this would be in collaboration with Sri Lanka. This would again be a tripartite agreement. Here again, the US soon withdrew, citing corruption, which is again brings us to thing two, that is corruption has always been a big concern in Sri Lanka. Not to say that the company is also clean shit here, but the problem is that the highlight is corruption, right? And then the third factor of it, which was about the Hambantota airport, where India has been keen on having some kind of stake in the Hambantota airport. because of the Chinese presence in Hambantota in terms of the port. So I think when India was consistently talking about this, there was not much progress made on this. What happened, I think, in 2023 or 2024 was I think there was some kind of consensus where basically an Indian firm, which not a lot of people had heard of, called Shaurya Aeronautics, and then the Russian company, which would manage the airport. So both India and Russia would manage the airport, and Sri Lanka would still be looking after the sensitive issues of the airport. Now, this was again a third model that came in. This indicated geopolitics because the US was not really happy with a Russian firm coming in with whatever was happening in Russia and Ukraine. And then I think before Biden just left, I think they had also sanctioned Shaurya Aeronautics. So this project also slowly faltered. I mean, there were certain concerns that were expressed that again about nationalism and why do we have to give an external stakeholder a management opportunity to look after Sri Lankan airport. This was a concern, right? But it also shows thing three, which is geopolitics. So politics, geopolitics, corruption. I think these are the things that have been consistently having an impact.
So hearing you, not too much hope should be attached to Trincomalee.
I think it's in the beginning phases. There's again, this is what was disclosed. This is a government-to-government agreement. From here on, they will try to explore the business opportunities, right? So here we are at the beginning, and we have seen these kind of collaboration opportunities fall flat. And considering how useful UAE is to both India and Sri Lanka, and how useful energy connectivity and energy projects are for both these countries at this point in time. I think both the countries are hoping or optimistic about going ahead and trying to sort this issue. But again, it's in its initial phase, so we don't know what exactly to expect once the business negotiation starts taking place. What does this entail? Again, this is still in its beginning phases. So there is a possibility that the oil tank farms, the UAE might have a stake in that, which was earlier being discussed between India and Sri Lanka, or in fact about the bi-directional oil pipeline that is being connected between India and Sri Lanka. So these are certain two options that they are exploring, but we don't exactly know what it is. But again, as I said, this is just the beginning. There are many more things that will follow up after that, and I think that is where the concern is. Just one more thing I would rather like to add is in terms of trilateral collaboration, I think there is a lot more that India could do even with smaller neighbors and with other neighbors. I think probably it's smaller issues like try to connect the Ramayana corridor or the the Buddhist corridor even with countries like Nepal. I think that is where we can try to it is a win-win collaboration for both of them, and I think India as a major stakeholder, I think it has the opportunity to do it. And I think Colombo Security Conclave is also one good example where countries of like-mindedness have worked together. But again, we don't see that much progress when it comes to project-specific collaborations, but we are seeing something in terms of at least where we are working with like-minded countries to counter certain transnational threats and other issues.
Thanks. Gulbeen, final question before we go in for a Q&A. And this is purely on domestic politics in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has had a terrible history of ethnic conflict. We now have a Sinhalese nationalist party in power. Where does Sinhala politics, nationalist politics, stand today in Sri Lanka? And what is the kind of relationship which is there between the communities, not just the Tamils, but also the Muslim community, because we've had riots and tensions a couple of years back. What is the state of ethnic politics in Sri Lanka with Sinhalese nationalist government in power? A much more should I say, hyper-nationalist government which is in power. We've also had earlier parties which have been Sinhala nationalist parties, but this one is like the next level one. So what exactly is the situation right now?
Interestingly, as we have seen, we have already discussed about JVP following a pragmatic approach. Even on these issues also, we have seen a significant shift. What we saw JVP in 80s because there has been a significant shift. And even, in fact, the parliamentary elections, JVP got more votes in some of the northeastern areas than the other parties. So now the government is now talking about that they would try to resolve this problem. They will bring a new constitution, and that is why I think probably this time during Prime Minister Modi's visit, he also did not specifically mention about 13 amendment, because maybe left it to government to resolve it. So those are the promises. I mean, those promises we have heard before also, but now this government seems to be, trying to address, because I think there is a realization, and particularly during the Aragalaya movement, particularly among the youth, we have seen that many people, Sinhala youth, they were apologizing. They were now saying that we did some mistake and this thing. So there were some kind of, I won't say regret or like that, I mean, totally shifted that ethnic kind of differences which is there. But I think there is an understanding that we cannot continue to have these ethnic issues, because this is a real issue which affects everyone. So I think that kind of it is there now because of the economic crisis. Probably everybody is focusing on these economic issues because it affects everyone. Coming to the relationship between communal religious relationship and Muslims, I think after Easter Sunday attack, I think it was really bad for the Muslims, because when I interacted some of the Sri Lankans, I was told that they felt it. Even the liberal, progressive people who were having very good relations, ethnic communal relations, they felt as if like there are some kind of suspicions. Even people knew that these are progressive Muslims, they don't have anything to do with this thing, but still that kind of differences were there, I think. But then I think the Sri Lankan Muslims, the way they handled the situation, I was interacting one lady who is well known in Sri Lanka, and she was telling me she personally tried to apologize because she felt that was so wrong, and she felt some kind of guilt feeling was there, and she was personally ringing people and apologizing. Then other people saying, why you are like saying sorry? Then said, no, we need to do something. I think the way Sri Lankan Muslims handled the situation, dealt with it, they showed that no, nothing to do with those people who were the mastermind and all. So I think that made a difference. So after that economic crisis, of course those differences are there once it comes. You cannot expect that it will go away, that differences, and when there are like so many news coming about radicalization and extremism, so those doubts, suspicions are there. But I think it was not that bad as immediately after the Easter Sunday attack crisis. So we can just hope. But then people are saying that the way the ruling party during the election campaign, the way they were talking about addressing the governance issues, not only ethnic but other governance issues, I think they are not focusing much on this. And I think I've seen some articles in media reports that in local council elections, it will be coming, the forthcoming local council election, they are probably that euphoria about JVP, that I think it's not there now, which we saw during presidential or parliamentary elections. So the governance issue as a whole, not only ethnic issue, it's a major concern. How much they are going to do? They initiated on the corruption issue. They tried to do something, but then it's like it's not easy. We should not. There should be. I think people are expecting too much within 6-7 months. It's not possible, but I think it is there. At personal level, when you talk, even the Tamils say that personally, neighbors with neighbors, they are having good relations. It's not that they are having very bad relations, not talking terms. All good relations are of course there among the communities. But then that angst against the government, because many of the Tamil issues are not yet addressed. Missing persons issue, then the PTA, removal of PTA, government is not doing, though they promised. So all these issues are not yet addressed. So until and unless those questions, those issues are addressed, I think that grievances will be there. So it is very much there.
Yeah, may I also, Mr. Sushant, just add a couple of remarks on that. I think she's spot on that. Basically, we must give credit where due. the current government, even during the campaign and even after that, always promoted a common Sri Lankan identity. They have always, because they come from a leftist background, other than anti-Indian sentiments in the 80s and all those things, they have learned from that, come back. They have been always talking about the common Sri Lankan identity, treating everyone equally, and they have been totally against extremism. So if you ask me, I from the Muslim community, and if I speak to my Tamil friends and all those things, in our living memory in the recent past, minorities have never been felt safe as much as they are now. So you must give them that credit. They have brought the entirety of the Sri Lankans together, and they would like to run as a secular government. That's a good step. I mean, that is one of the big pluses in this government has, and for that you must give them the credit. I think they have done it very well, and that's why never in the history a southern party had won electorates in a parliamentary election in north and south, and also in the east, where the Muslims everywhere, where the Sinhalese are concentrated, where the Muslims are concentrated, where the Tamils are concentrated, where the hill country Tamils, which is Indian origin Tamils, all of them have voted for them. So that's a good sign. So hopefully they will not lose this momentum, and will seize this opportunity to once and for all roll out a long-lasting solution to the devolution issues, so that it will never resurface again somewhere down the line. But having said so, Sri Lankan community also over a period of time had learned a lot. If you ask me what is the most worst moment in the Sri Lankan history, I would say 83, and then 2019, and post 2019 the attack. So everyone, vast majority of the Sri Lankan feel like so. There will be always a little minority or few who will always will talk on the line of communalism and race and religion and all those things. But as a country and as a community, Sri Lankans have kind of risen above it, and this government has given real leadership to that, and they must get the credit for that.
I'll just open the floor for a Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left. Please identify yourself and please keep your questions short, and please say who you are addressing your question to.
Greetings to all, and I am Bhavisha Soni, and a founder of an NGO. Sir, my question is to Sebi sir. Given your experience as a former Foreign Affairs Minister of Sri Lanka, have been navigated numerous political process, what message would you like to convey to the youth of both nations regarding diplomacy and their political contributions?
Mr. Sabri, I'll take a couple of questions so that then everybody can answer and we can finish in time.
I'm Rajesh. I'm a journalist from Swarajya magazine. My question is for Aditya. Based on what Mr. Sabri said and the discussion we have had so far, do you feel this is the best time for India and Sri Lanka to resolve a lot of the pending issues, because JVP is a party that was seen as Sinhala extremist or something in the past, but right now it is going ahead with a broad, all Sri Lankans have one kind of identity, as Mr. Sabri pointed out. Do you feel this? And the other question I would also like to know from you is, do you feel that this lack of transparency or questions get amplified when it comes to projects in northern Sri Lanka? Anything that has to deal with Tamils gets little more attention than rest of Sri Lanka, not just the India-China thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Namaste everyone. Myself Rudra Pratap, elected Joint Secretary of College in Delhi University, Satyavati College, and a student of Political Science in Delhi University. My question is to Gulbeen ma'am. How can India and Sri Lanka collaborate more effectively on maritime security in the Indian Ocean region? Thank you.
Hi everyone, myself Arun, and my question to is all that is Sri Lanka as...
Whom are you asking the question?
So the questions to all.
To all? Okay, fine.
Open floor. Sorry. So my question to is that, is Sri Lanka as focused as India considering the Indian Ocean region, following the question of Rudra? Is Sri Lanka as focused on over maritime security, or the focus is more externally dependent, like partnership with China and US, considering the point of Sri Lanka?
Is that right? Okay, so I'll hand over the floor now to the panelists. Rihanna, no direct question addressed to you, but if there is something you want to add as final comments, please go ahead.
So I'll just add a bit on the last question that was asked, whether Sri Lanka is as focused as India on maritime security or whether there are greater concerns. I think to a great extent, Sri Lanka is concerned largely with the economy and making sure that economic growth and recovery is on track. I think that is the main priority of the government and to a large extent the people as well. So, of course, other issues like maritime security, energy security, all of this are seen as sort of trickling up towards economic, recovery. So, I'll just end with that. Thank you.
Coming to maritime security, I think as an island nation, Sri Lanka is maritime security is important for Sri Lanka, and there are lots of issues like India Sri Lanka maritime security. If you say now in the maritime sector, we are having cooperations like naval to naval cooperation is there, then Coast Guard cooperation is also there. Other than that, non-traditional area like for example, India is constantly supporting on oil spill, the marine environmental issues. So there are cooperation. Then again, this coastal surveillance radar system and in Sri Lankans, they are working with Indian Fusion Center in Gurugram, which is there for maritime domain awareness. So all these issues are there at the region, at the sub-regional level. If you see, Colombo Security Conclave is already there under that platform. Also, they are both of them are working. But at the same time, there are issues. I'm sure you all know about the fishermen issue. That's a major issue. It's one of the major returns in the bilateral relations. And I think both sides need to work, sit, as Minister Sabri has mentioned, both seats and to see that the highest level. Now, they're constantly engaging. There's a joint working group which regularly meets and they discuss. Then the fisherman level talks also happen sometime. But then the problem is at the highest level, they'll have to take issues, how they can resolve it. So there, I think they need to work. Again, I said that continental shelf issue, that is like some kind of diplomatic negotiation. Probably they will start. That is again an issue where they need to resolve. Other than that, these are the areas, I think, maritime security. I think this question was asked.
To answer the question on maritime security, I'll just build upon what has been said, right? A couple of things that you'll have to keep a notice upon. One, that Sri Lanka is going through a defense modernization program, right? Which is in itself indicating that it is moving away from its internal looking and terrorism related or extremist related threats to now more towards threats from the Indian Ocean region, right? Then the defense cooperation pact that has been signed with India, that also shows that there is an increasing appetite to increase collaboration and look at broader threats in the Indian Ocean region. And third, also during the when the Red Sea crisis began, and Sri Lanka also had deployed its ship to make sure that the maritime order and the Indian Ocean remains peaceful. So I think they are committed, but probably it's also an issue about resources, which now with the economic crisis, I think there should be a better way to manage this. Is this the best time to resolve India-Sri Lanka relations? I don't think any time is the best time to resolve India-Sri Lanka relations. I mean, there are leaders who have had very close relations, but look, when you want to resolve certain things, you'll also have to think about what domestic implication it'll have, not just for India, but also for Sri Lanka. And imagining, just because someone is having a pragmatic relationship with India does not mean that all issues could be solved. Just for example, take the 13th Amendment issue, right? I mean, India in itself is showing now increasing pragmatism to the issue, and it has presumably not brought up this issue multiple times, just so that Sri Lankan government can think about the issue by itself. I think it's more or less both the countries are realizing where they can work, where they can't work. The fishermen issue has been going on regardless of who comes to power. I think that seems to be a perennial issue. It's getting increasingly aggressive, but at the same time, you see that issue has persisted. And I think a leader can only do so much, and their personality will obviously add up to it. But there is a broader structural issue that needs to be solved. And I don't think the broader Chinese issue will ever be solved because the Chinese will keep investing and increasing their presence in the region. Sorry, I didn't get your question on lack of transparency in the Tamil provinces, but I'm happy to take this conversation outside if for the time reasons.
Last word to you, sir.
Yeah, I think first of all, somebody asked that we are interested in the maritime security. Yes, we are very much interested. Being an island nation, without maritime security, our very existence could be threatened. And I think there is a greater realization in Sri Lanka in the defense establishment. I used to sit in the Security Council for 3-4 years now, until I got out of politics in last September. Basically, everyone understand that without international cooperation, you will never repel a threat of terrorism or extremism. You can't do it within yourself. So basically, particularly without the support of India at that point in time, US with intelligence and all the other intelligence sharing, and fund-related activities of the LTTE. Without the international support, we could have never done that. So therefore, we understand that you can't be living in an isolation. And then more than that, in early 70s, Mrs. Bandaranaike, if you remember, launched a famous resolution in the UN that is to declare the Indian Ocean and the airspace above it as a zone of peace. That resolution was co-sponsored by several countries, including India. And since then, we have been committed for a peaceful zone in this area. So that our heritage, that our legacy, I think respective governments in power will continue to do so. So important because it's also important for us to ensure the freedom of navigation and maritime security, because port is one of our biggest assets. The biggest asset of Sri Lanka, in my opinion, is its location. If the location is unless you open up the location for maritime or airspace or whatever it is, what's the point of having a location? So therefore, it's important for us and countering non-traditional threats such as piracy, trafficking, and also climate change, trafficking of all sorts, human trafficking, drug trafficking, smuggling. So I think we are very, very much interested, and we are working with India on multiple layers in this. BIMSTEC, IORA. Unfortunately, the SARC had not gone up to the not grown up to the expectations of everybody, including you and me, and all of us who are listening to this. And of course, so subject to that, yes, they are very, very much interested. I think we can be a reliable partner in that. In that, and we have been appreciated by Australia and France and EU, everybody, as a reliable partner in fighting trafficking, in all sorts of trafficking, smuggling, drug trafficking, human trafficking. So that comes to that. And then other question about what young diplomats and the people who are interested in diplomacy could do to help build a better relationship with Sri Lanka and others. Travel more, come and see Sri Lanka, build friendship among Sri Lankans and your people. That goes a long, long way. And then, of course, be transparent. Don't give way to conspiracy theories, and ask for answers and get all the information to the domain. And don't be misled by some of the opinionistic journalists coming out with the headline-seeking one article about a conspiracy. You need to go behind that and see if there is any truth or not. On my part, I think irrespective of who comes to power, everybody understands the importance of India for Sri Lanka's security, peace, prosperity, and also coexistence within the country. And therefore, no one will take India for granted on that. I don't think that India should need to worry about that. And of course, I agree with my colleagues, who all of them, who the fellow panelists, who are very well articulated the fact that if you see that all the issues could be ironed out next 6 months, it will not. Even if you iron out one issue, there are 10 issues comes in. What we need to have is mutual respect, a broader spectrum of engagement in different level, and try to resolve these issues. And I'm sure we will have a great future together. Congratulations for India for seeing that phenomenon growth during the last 10 or 12 years continuously. And I hope that India does well, and that will definitely trigger off into the other region, as I explained earlier. And thank you very much again for having this wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabri. Thank you very much, Rehana, Tawfiq. Dr. Gulbeen, and of course, my friend Aditya, and thanks to our colleague Shivam, who put together this whole program. We would love to have you, Mr. Sabri, and Rehana again on another occasion, not just to talk about Sri Lanka, but maybe other things as well. But thank you, everybody, for attending uh, this particular event. I've learned a lot, and as usual, I'm really impressed with our Sri Lankan colleagues for how articulate they are and how pragmatic they are. So thank you so much, sir, for your presence. Thank you, everybody.